Act 2. The Long Way Round. Chapter 8. As the TARDIS settled and the room's movement became more of a low vibration, I stood there almost unable to comprehend what he just said. My home. But it was gone. And then I remembered, TARDISes weren't just spaceships. They were time ships. You mean we can go back to before it was destroyed? I said, feeling a hope I'd not felt in a long time. My family. My real family.
Are gone.
The Doctor interrupted bluntly, but with a tone of deep sadness in his voice, and my momentary anger at his bluntness faded, when I sensed that perhaps he didn't just say that for my benefit.
I'm sorry,
he said, fixing me with a somber stare.
but you can't go back. Not in that sense, at least.
Even though I knew he was right, I couldn't stop myself asking. But why? The Doctor sighed.
Honestly,
He leaned back against one of the coral pillars.
I could tell you that your planet is a fixed point in time, and its fate can't be avoided. Or I could tell you that any attempts to save your family would result in creating a paradox. But if I'm being truthful, I don't know why.
Even before I could open my mouth to protest, he continued.
The fact is that it could be either of those, or neither. Or we could try one, and create a timeline where the other is the outcome simply because of our presence.
He looked towards the grey ceiling once again, which remained solid, but he seemed to be looking past it outside the TARDIS.
Out there, right now, is the time vortex. A passage across the web of time. But the Time War has created countless timelines, different versions of events, some lasting for millennia, others mere seconds, coming into existence, existing, and dying. And not even necessarily in that order.
He looked back to me. My face at that point must have been one of sheer confusion, as his face dropped slightly when he realised he'd lost me. He tugged at his beard, sucking airing through his teeth.
Let me put it this way. When this war started,
He held up his left hand.
I was around 2,000 years old,
He paused, narrowing his eyes in thought.
I think. But now,
He held up his right hand.
I'm somewhere in the early 800s. Yet I've not gained or lost any life as far as I can tell, and I have no idea how that happened.
He juggled his hands as if he were a set of scales.
Maybe one day I will find out why. Maybe I won't. Maybe I already have and I've forgotten again.
He let his hands drop to his sides.
The point is, as things are now, whilst you remember losing your family, you still remember them. But more importantly, you remember them before losing them. Of no doubt happier times. So would you really want to do anything to jeopardize losing all those memories?
If I can be perfectly honest, I wanted more than anything to slap him at that point. But at the same time, I knew he was right. Travelling about so much on the freighter, you heard news of the war. Sometimes even saw it, but it wasn't always straightforward. It was one thing to find out entire ports completely destroyed, but once we arrived in a port that had been missing for 3 years, as if it had never been gone. Another time we found ourselves with 7 pieces of cargo to be delivered to a non-existent destination. And it was only later in the mess hall that someone suggested that maybe it had once existed, but had been erased from time. We'd always dismissed such ideas as nonsense, but standing in a space time machine that was bigger on the inside, suddenly it didn't seem that far-fetched. So in deep in thought was I that I jumped slightly when I felt a hand on my shoulder. The Doctor had walked over to me and looked at me. His eyes were still somber, but now with a comforting twinkle.
Believe me, I understand. More than you can possibly know.
I put my hand on his, and whilst I didn't say anything, he seemed to understand.
Right then.
The Doctor perked up, slapping my other shoulder with his hand and turning back to the console.
We should be nearly there. I'll try and land us as close to where we need to be as possible.
I joined him next to the console, looking at the scanner screen. I couldn't make sense of most of the data, but a pang shot through my heart as soon as I recognised the name of my home moon. So, I swallowed hard, hearing my own voice crack slightly, and cleared my throat. So, why are we going there? The Doctor had moved carefully around the console, flicking switches and dials.
For the past few years, well, decades, I've been occasionally revisiting some old battlegrounds, and I've noticed some...
He paused, picking up a hammer which hung from the console. and brought it down hard on top of a shower of sparks.
Irregularities.
I put my hands up to cover my face as the sparks flew, and when I lowered them, the doctor was already around the other side of the console, hitting something else with another shower of sparks. What sort of irregularities? I said, slightly incredulously, given that after everything we just talked about, I wouldn't have thought irregular was much of a surprise to the doctor anymore. He leapt forward, resting both hands on the console.
The Daleks are disappearing.
I sighed sharply. But isn't that a good thing? The doctor looked up, his expression the same, but his eyes betrayed his worry.
That's just the thing. It's the dead ones that are disappearing.
Almost as if to punctuate his last statement, he pushed down on a lever to his left and the TARDIS shuddered to a halt, falling silent save for the gent thrum of its interior atmosphere.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for.
He said slightly, under his breath as he looked at the console screen before looking up at me.
We're here.
He strode past me towards the doors we'd entered by. I began to follow him, but he turned around sharply, giving me an intense but comforting look.
I'll understand if you'd rather wait in here. I shouldn't be too long.
I drew myself up confidently. No, I need to see it. He nodded his head gently in understanding.
Very well. But just prepare yourself. It's probably not what you were expecting.